Welcome to Parenting 202, Safeguarding Our Children in Challenging Times. I'm Patty Mitro-Costas. I'm the Director of Prevention for Gosnold, and I'm happy to be here on behalf of Gosnold, and I got to see our beautiful offices here on Gosnold on Nantucket, and I'm envious of Katie being over here, at least this time of year. It's lovely, and again, my pleasure to be here, and happy to be a part of the evening tonight. This event is brought to you by a collaboration of the PD Advisory Council of Nantucket Cottage Hospital, the Cape and Islands Suicide Prevention Coalition, Gosnold on Nantucket, Fair Winds, Counseling Center, Briar Patch Pediatrics, and the Nantucket Golf Club. Our other partners include the Nantucket Public Schools, so thank you to them, and to the Behavioral Health Task Force. It is my pleasure to introduce two very distinguished speakers tonight. They had very lengthy credentials that are so impressive. I said, how do I summarize on these two gentlemen? And I said, I'm going to need to put my glasses on. So Dr. Scott Pollard is a professor at the College of Psychology and the co-director of Suicide and the Violence Prevention Office at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's a licensed psychologist and an internationally recognized expert on youth suicide, school crisis, and parenting in challenging times. He has authored or co-authored 5 books and many chapters and articles on these subjects. He previously directed psychological services for a large Texas school system for 24 years and is past president of the National Association of School Psychologists and is a past prevention division director of the American Association of Suicide Prevention. He's very dedicated to prevention and has testified about mental health and the needs of children before the U.S. Congress on 4 separate occasions. He's the founding member of the National Emergency Assistance Team and has personally assisted school communities after many tragedies. So that's our first speaker. So I don't know, would you like me to introduce the second speaker as well? Again, very distinguished gentleman, Stephen Gray Wallace is the president and director of the Center for Adolescent Research and Education, a national collaboration of institutions and organizations committed to increasing positive youth outcomes and reducing negative risk behaviors. Stephen is a highly profiled participant in and commentator on the modern-day adolescent experience. For 15 years, he served as SAD's national chairman and the chief executive officer, expanding SAD's peer-to-peer programming and nationwide outreach and speaking to thousands of SAD students across the country about positive decision-making. After his tenure as the chairman and CEO, he was the senior advisor for policy, research, and education for SAD and the director of SAD's Teens Today and Teen Driving Research projects. He is the author of the critically acclaimed book called Reality Gap: Alcohol, Drugs, and Sex, What Parents Don't Know, and What Teens Really Aren't Telling. The Reality Gap was named one of the top 50 books for parents of tweens and teens by 2 national parenting organizations. The White House, the American Camp Association, SAD, Camping Magazine, have formally honored Stephen for being a tireless and passionate advocate for youth. He's a graduate of Bucknell University in Pennsylvania and lives in Palm Beach County, Florida, and also in Barnstable County, Massachusetts. So it's my pleasure to introduce both of those speakers to you tonight. If anybody... And also one little housekeeping note, if anybody needs CEUs, they can see Gretchen in the back following the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Indeed, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm Scott. First of all, by your attendance tonight, you've indicated that you really care about your children. I appreciate the time and energy for coming tonight. How many of you are parents of adolescents? Do you mind raising your hands? I am so sorry, Randy. Of course, I don't really mean that. But in today's world, it's not enough to know your kid's friends. You got to know the kid's friends' parents. You have to be the one that demands to know what's going on. We're raising children in a very challenging time. Yes, we'll talk about technology tonight. We'll talk about depression. You'll hear some of Stephen and I's ideas about good parenting in today's world. Some of you have small children. Between my wife and I, we actually have 4 children. We refer to them as they are all ours. And I'm always very respectful of my ex-wife. You know what really helped? My ex-wife is a psychologist. We made a pact and we divorced. You don't talk badly about me to our children, I won't talk badly about you. And we never have. Sometimes when the youngest would come to me and say something negative about her mom, my ex-wife, do you think I wanted to pile on and add to it? I never did, not a single time. She will always be our children's mother. And she certainly deserved my respect and financial support. Too often, kids are in the middle every day between separation and divorce issues. Restitution is the concept I want to talk about tonight. Jeremy, who was a pretty active little guy, was all of 3 years old. He's shaking a floor lamp. He knows at our house that meant time out. He doesn't want to go to time out, but he does. On his way into that room, he throws the door open. I watched the doorknob go right through the drywall. Am I angry? Do I want to yell at him? Of course. I don't. I went to another room. I gathered my thoughts. When I came back, I had a simple question for him. Jeremy, how are you going to fix the hole you put in the wall in your room? He's 3 years old. He has no idea. He starts crying. Jeremy, get your piggy bank down because we're going right now to Ace Hardware and you're buying the materials. So restitution starts early, helping kids to learn to be accountable. By the way, if I backed into one of your cars in the parking lot tonight, are you going to scream at me about my ability to operate a motor vehicle? Hopefully you're going to ask me for my insurance card. The concept is separating the deed from the doer. All kids make mistakes, and we need to let them know what those mistakes are, but our love for them should never be in question. You know what I sincerely hope? You believe your sons and daughters are the most wonderful children who ever lived. If you believe that about your 2, and Joe and Molly, if you believe that about your 2, you've given them a tremendous advantage in this world. You show them that every day, every way, they have a lot of support, and that is really, really important. Now, in the introduction, to be honest, you know what I've spent an entire career doing? That's responding to tragedies. Many school shootings, many suicides of kids, many tragic car accidents. What I'm really dedicated to is prevention and what can we do in these challenging times that we live in. A lot of children have what are called adverse childhood experiences, which cause them a great deal of difficulty, maybe even throughout their entire life. What do I mean by that? They live in poverty. They're neglected. They're physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. Maybe they live with a family member that has a mental illness. Maybe they have a family member that has a serious substance abuse problem. A couple of my thoughts tonight. First of all, McDonald's. There's not even a McDonald's on this island, right? Well, how wonderful. Now, but McDonald's has this slogan that they have the family meal, the full value meal. Do you know where that actually is? That's around your kitchen table with free and easy communication between you and your children. And most of all, I'm an advocate for listening. Our son Jeremy loved basketball. By the way, he picked it, not me. I mean, I do like sports, of course. Jeremy even spent his own money to buy dribble glasses. You know what those are? You put those on, you cannot see that basketball. You have to know where it is by feel. And we put a goal outside. We put a light on it so he could shoot at night, which is what he wanted to do. Here's what Jeremy knew. Anytime, day or night, no matter how tired I was, he'd say, "Dad, will you rebound?" "Sure, son." I go out. I'm standing underneath the basket. I actually am not saying a word. Jeremy's shooting. He's relaxed. All I'm doing is catching the ball when it goes through the net, a nice chest pass back. All of a sudden, he's talking to me. He's telling me all these things I want to know about because I'm his dad. And I would respond with something really insightful based on all those years of graduate education when I would say, yeah, I'm not sure, son. What are you thinking? We have some young people here tonight. I'm pretty sure they don't want their parents to say, do this, do that, you won't have a problem. They want to be listened to. And as a psychologist, here are two words that I do not use. I understand. Could I really? Only if something like that happened to me. And we also have to be careful not to basically dismiss or give them a little pep talk. Now let's imagine, I'm going to use Tess for an example. Let's imagine she's a 14-year-old girl. She's devastated by the breakup of the first significant relationship in her life. I'm the well-meaning adult at school. I'm so sorry this has happened to you, Tess. Things are going to get better. Time has a way of healing everything. I'd like to talk to you about what happened to me when I was 14. Yeah, that was really difficult. I'm 68 today. I'm really happy. Did I help her? Did I focus on her at all? By the way, Doris Nelson broke up with me when I was 14. I am sure she is still sorry. All right, a little humor. I'm glad that you like that, because we will try to throw some of that in. Not enough to know your kid's friends, you got to know the kid's friends' parents. Technology. It is a privilege. It is not a right. I am for technology-free times. Mealtime would be the logical one. Do you know what I sometimes hear? Mom will say, I'm all for that, but I can't get my husband to put down his phone even for 40 minutes while we all eat together. Because of the divorce, Jill was going back and forth between two homes. Jill, Wednesday night, I'm sorry, I don't care what's going on. Wednesday night, it's dinner at our house, and I will be expecting you. There will be no excuses. By the way, do you know activities caused a lot of high school students to be stressed? Why is that? The school team, the club team conflict. The school play, the community play, the dance recital. I like to tell families that have high-achieving students in affluent areas, how about just one activity a season? Don't you want the kid's life to revolve around your family? And then for everybody out there that thinks they know a kid that's going to make their living playing a professional sport, do you know what the chances of that are really? And you know, one knee injury, and they're still pretty good, but they're not going to make a living playing a professional sport. Don't misunderstand, I'm a big fan of sports. I'm a fan of teamwork, lessons learned, and the weakest player on the team should be treated with the same amount of respect as the star on the team. Now, behind me it says, don't set your kid's room up to be a little kingdom. So let's think about that for a moment. I'm an adolescent. I have my room, my telephone, my movies, my music, my internet access. Why am I going out of that room? It's only one reason. Mom made dinner. Watch me try to pick up that plate of food and eat it in isolation. We do need to set some limits. The other day, a dad said to me, well, my kid's upstairs. I know he's on his computer. If I want to get him a message, I just send him an email. Dad, what's wrong with actually talking face to face with your child? So part of the message tonight is slow some things down. I spoke to 6th grade parents 2 weeks ago. My message to them was pretty straightforward. Your happiness should not depend on whether or not your 11-year-old likes you right now. You are the parent. all that technology, it is a privilege. It is not a right. I almost wanted to make them stand up and repeat after me, I am the parent. I thought that would be going too far. The principal called me the next day. The parents of the sixth graders, they loved what you had to say. They want you to come back. Why would I come back? They want you to tell their children why they're going to change a few things. And I've spent an entire career answering a parent's question, and they have to know exactly what I'm going to say. I also want to encourage you to support the schools. The people in education, they didn't get in it for the money. They got in it to make a difference in children's lives. My wife was most recently the principal of a very expensive private school in Fort Lauderdale. She said, it's like every parent, Scott, they're either an attorney or they're bringing their attorney. And all she's trying to do is hold the kid accountable. Let them have a consequence. Maybe they actually need an after-school detention because of their behavior. And kids learn from that. Stephen, my good friend, will talk in a few minutes, and I'm only going to say a couple things about the car and young people. But I like the phrase, don't be intoxicated. What is the most dangerous thing everybody in this room probably did today? You were on the phone, driving your car, or maybe even worse than that, you were texting. Some kids will say, what's the big deal? I mean, I look up like every 5 or 10 seconds to see where I'm going. So Gandhi had a great quote. What we do speaks so loudly to our children that when we try to talk to them, they cannot hear us. What's that mean? They're watching everything you do. How you treat your partner, how you treat your neighbors. Do you drive and text or talk on the phone? Do you have a few drinks and then get behind the wheel of a car? If I did those things, why wouldn't I expect all 4 of our children to do those things? With the youngest, I still remember a conversation. Jill, the law is 21. I will not provide alcohol for you. I will not condone it, nor will I look the other way. And in my humble opinion, Jill, all 4 of your grandparents were alcoholics. Alcoholism runs in our family. You need to know that, and hopefully that will help you make better decisions. Do you think the Poland family is the only one that has a problem with alcoholism? You know what I find in communities all across the country? The adults are looking the other way. They're thinking somehow, if the kids all get drunk at our house, this is because they're supervised somehow, this is okay, but they're all going to get in the cars and drive away. I think I've mentioned several of those points, and I don't want to belabor them. But you know what I would really hope tonight? You go home and you tell the 8th grader, and you call the one that is in high school or just going off to college, and simply tell them how much you love them and care about them. Not for the person they might become someday. Just let them know how much you love them right now for the person they are. That would be one of my greatest hopes after our session tonight. You already heard me emphasize taking charge of the technology. So here's an example recently. You know, I have 2 twin boys. They're 10 years old. I try to monitor the internet sites they go to. But you know, when I go to put their little brother to bed, I think they visit all those sites I don't want them to visit. Do you think I should block those sites? This is a pretty easy question to answer. Yes, Mom, block the sites. Take charge of technology. By the way, if you have a 13-year-old girl and you're buying her a laptop that has a camera in it, what do you think I'm going to say to you? Sexting is a terrible problem, has led to humiliation, and sadly has contributed greatly to the suicides of some young people. You got to talk to them about all of this. Let's take years ago, Anybody else besides me raised in a home where there was only one telephone? Anybody remember that? And do you remember there was actually a cord on that phone? I swear to you, my mother sat next to it my entire adolescence. Was I ever on the phone in the middle of the night? Did I have a long, emotional conversation with anybody? Not unless I wanted my mother to overhear. She'd hand me the phone and move like 2 feet and sit down. And it used to be when you came home from school, it was a safe haven. No one could reach you. That's not the case today. The literature says that about 1/3 of adolescent girls in particular wake up in the middle of the night to see who might have posted what about them. Cyberbullying is a huge problem. We have to talk about good citizenship that involves online behavior. There are a wealth of resources to help you. Now, most families don't need this, but in some families, yes, we might have to monitor every keystroke, every communication, till things right themselves. And perhaps another key message tonight, if somebody tells you your child has some difficulties, your child would really benefit from mental health services, if they don't have it in for your child, they're sincerely trying to help you. Do not hesitate to get those services. Today at lunch, Stephen and I met with like 12 practitioners, wonderful practitioners in the community. Somehow we have to remove the stigma about seeking mental health treatment because some children need that support desperately. Margaret Mead had a great quote. Perhaps the true measure of a society is, can we teach the men to be good fathers? Frankly, I think the jury is still out. But I commend every single dad who came here tonight. Your involvement in your kid's life means they're healthier, happier, and better achieving at school. When our son Jeremy had his first child, he now has 6. Could somebody tell him to stop? Between my wife and I, we have 15 grandchildren, and one daughter, although married, has no children as yet. But I remember talking to him and saying, Jeremy, whatever it is, there cannot be any aspect of child care that you don't do at least 50% of it. That's what kids need. Dad fully involved and invested in every aspect of their child care. I'd be remiss tonight not to say a few things about the problem of youth suicide. That's where my passion is. I travel all around the country presenting on this topic. Monday it was Palm Beach. Last Wednesday, Thursday, Friday it was Missouri. The week before that it was Louisiana. Suicide is unfortunately the second leading cause of death for adolescents in this country. The figures are staggering. I know that Randy substitute teaches at the high school. Basically, what does our national data tell us? 14.7% of all high school kids in this country made a plan to die by suicide last year. 8.6% made an attempt in the last 12 months. You know what's really scary? For the most part, their parents, teachers, counselors, they have no idea. Who knows all about their suicidal thoughts, plans, actions? That would be their friends. Let me debunk the greatest misperception about this topic. Talking about suicide will never plant the idea in a kid's head. If anything, it gives them the chance to unburden themselves. And they need to learn how to get help for myself and how to get help for my friends. Depression is not a weakness. It's not something we can just snap out of. More and more research is talking about how it is related to brain chemistry. But here's where a lot of parents get stuck. How do I know it isn't just typical teenage behavior? I mean, I think she's preparing me for, she's going away to Amherst next year. Aren't all teenagers irritable, moody, and withdrawing from their parents? Well, let me ask you a couple of key questions. Is this persistent? Is this something that's gone on for 2 or 3 weeks or more? Is this something that's pervasive? Is this affecting your child's peer relations, school performance, family life? And has she dropped out of what was previously a pleasurable activity? Funny you ask that. She was on the dance team for 4 years. This year she doesn't care about it. If you've got those 3 things going on in your kid's life, you need to seek mental health treatment for them. And this came up today. Oh, but she doesn't want to go for counseling. I'm sorry. I don't think that's a decision a 14-year-old can make. Do you want to see a male counselor? Do you want to see a female counselor? Do you want me to go with you? But you are going for counseling. Very important that we follow through with that. So, pretty well covered those warning signs. It is treatable. They're evidence-based treatment. Whenever a young person dies by suicide, my first thought is this simple: untreated or undertreated mental illness. There's no great mystery to this. The intervention of any one person can make all the difference in the world. And if your kid got treatment and they were suicidal at some point, don't be afraid to keep checking in and asking, are you having those thoughts? Are you still thinking you might not want to live? By the way, sleep deprivation is definitely connected to adolescent depression, hopelessness, and suicidal thoughts. I said this earlier today in this room. The national recommendation is no high school should start classes ever before 8:30 in the morning. You know, I used to think it was pretty easy. You just get kids in bed early. High school kids are not wired to go to sleep early. So we got to do our best to get them in bed early. Take away the technology. Honey, it'll be charged for you. I'll have your phone and iPad. I'll hand them back to you in the morning. Do you really want somebody texting your daughter at 2:30 in the morning on a school night? Because without your supervision and involvement, that is exactly what might be happening. Removing all lethal means, get the gun out of the house. My partner and I just completed the suicide prevention plan for the state of Montana's schools. But in the conversation with one of the principals, and yes, of course it was after a tragedy, access to a gun, she could have used any one of 33 guns that were unlocked in her home. Let me quote a Houston teenager for you. The note to her parents, the goodbye message said, "Why did you make this so easy? Why did you leave this gun available to me?" If anybody ever tells you they're concerned about mental illness and substance abuse for one of your loved ones, please do not leave a gun at their ready access. I'd be remiss tonight not to let you see these warning signs: giving away prized possessions, making out a will, dramatic changes in behavior, writing about it, talking about it. We need to follow up anytime we have those behaviors. Now, on a more positive note, this comes from the World Health Organization. What protects young people? You see the points behind me. Having a good relationship with other young people. Okay, who does a disturbed kid go to for help? They go to another disturbed kid. Between 2 or 3 of them, they don't have enough sense to get one of you involved. If I was talking to your children, I'd ask them pretty simple questions. Who's your go-to trusted adult at school? Who would you go to if you had a serious problem or your friend had a serious problem? Who's your go-to adult at home or in the community? And you've got to find that shared time when your kid will talk to you. Maybe it's baking a cake. Maybe it's cooking dinner. Maybe it's riding the ferry back to the mainland. When will your kid talk to you? The rest of these are pretty self-explanatory. Whether we're talking the church, the synagogue, or the mosque, those are very protective for kids. And I know you have a school environment where every kid matters. Here is what I wish. Every kid walking into any school in America tomorrow sincerely believes somebody cared whether they showed up today or not. Our youngest daughter went to a high school of 4,000. A little more difficult to have a connection. In fact, she had teachers that didn't even learn her name. They were confused pretty much all year long. Since I believe she's one of the most wonderful kids who ever lived, you can see how frustrating it would be that the teacher doesn't know her name, let alone her hopes and her dreams. Family cohesion and stability, I think I've pretty well covered that. Problem-solving skills. One quick personal example. Somehow I doubt I'm the only person here that lost a loved one to suicide. For me, it was my dad. I was 25. I'm a good example of somebody that never thought it could happen in my family. Would I love to replay and have another chance at the last conversation with my father to ask him direct questions? Obviously, I've spent the last, 43 years trying to do something different and get this message across to the rest of the world. But Jeremy, our son, who's now a minister, he was 8. Jeremy, I need to talk to you a little more about the death of your grandfather. I mean, I know what happened to him. You already told me he had a heart attack. I'm sorry I never met him. Jeremy, there's a little more to that. And now that you're 8, hopefully you can understand what I'm about to say to you. And I want you to hear this from me, never from someone else. Your grandfather shot himself. He died by suicide. He looks at me and said, "You lied to me." "No, son, I didn't really lie. I was just waiting to give you more complete information." He thinks and thinks a while. He looks up and says, "Dad, you shouldn't feel guilty." "Oh, why is that?" "Well, your parents weren't both psychologists like mine are. They couldn't possibly have taught you everything I know about the importance of feeling good about yourself and recognizing everybody has problems. You just go get help." Now, wasn't that sweet that he was trying to alleviate my guilt? What's the most important thing? He's 8 years old. He knows he's loved and he's a good person. That's what I wish for every single child who resides on this island. Just that they know they are loved. And there are people to go to get help. Resiliency, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I'm sure Stephen will expand on it. It is a learned behavior. Can everybody think of somebody you know, there was a very traumatic event, and it was almost like their life was over? Maybe they never reinvested in relationships. Maybe they turned to substance abuse. Sadly, maybe they ended their life. Can you also think of somebody that it was difficult, but they went on with their life? Ultimately, they did reinvest in other relationships. They're always going to be sad by what happened, but they went on with their life. It's a learned behavior. When we're surrounded by loving and caring family and friends, we do better. When we utilize problem-solving skills, we are always optimistic about the future. We are comfortable venting and sharing strong emotions. That's when we do better. And that's what we want for all children, the ability to bounce back. These next points come from the Carnegie Foundation. Some people say just one significant adult in their lives besides their parents. Sometime in South Florida, it's just mom. There was a divorce. Everybody else is back in Pittsburgh. So she's going to sing at the church choir this Sunday. He's going to play in a soccer game. Who's going to show up? The retired naval guy across the street? Is one of the teachers going to come? Who's going to show up just to say, "You are important to me"? That's the challenge. And very often, that significant adult turns out to be an educator. Sense of safety, security in our home, our school, and our neighborhood. I've actually been a responder to 15 different school shootings, including almost all of them you read about. But I want to say something really clearly. schools are the safest places children go. Far safer than anywhere else they could possibly be. Even dramatically much safer than their own homes. So I'm always going to be for preventing a single death at school, but I'm going to be asking, where's our prevention program in our homes, our neighborhood, and in our community? By the way, Abraham Maslow was the guy that had it right. He had the pyramid theory. What's at the foundation for success for all of us? Having our physical needs taken care of. And by the way, if you're scared, if there was a tremendous argument last night and your dad left, maybe you got whacked as you were leaving your home today, maybe there wasn't enough to eat. Does it matter how great our educational lesson is this morning when you have those adverse things going on in your life? So we have to take care of the basic needs physically and that sense of belonging. Organized activities for everybody. I already said some kids have so many organized activities they cause stress. But I want to give you an example. 9-year-old kid at Millsap Elementary School that I counseled every single week. Literally says, Dr. Poland, you know what I want to do more than anything? I just want to play Little League Baseball. Great. I saw the forms in the office. Let's get them. Let's sign you up. You don't understand. My mom doesn't have $70. And even if she did, she works nights. I'll never be able to play Little League Baseball. Randy, I signed up to coach soccer when Jeremy was 5. I was just going to be an assistant. The next year I was the head coach. There was a kid on my list named Bobby Bryan. He doesn't come to practice. So I call up and I get his mom, Claire, on the phone. Take him off that list. He can't play. His dad left us and went to Chicago. I work every night till 6:30. He can't play. Where is he after school? He's in such and such a daycare. Claire, if you give me written permission, I will pick him up and I will take him to practice. And then it sounds like you'll be home by the time practice is over. Do you know I drove Bobby Bryan to practice until he was old enough at 16 to drive his own car? Bobby and I are friends on Facebook today. Okay, so we have to step forward and get involved in kids' lives. The last point up here, volunteer work. Every adolescent that's here, you know what I'm going to say to you? You know how you can truly find yourself? That is through service to other people. My wife's high school had a mandatory 100 hours of volunteer service. In 4 years, that's not really very much. I'd be looking more like 100 every year if it was up to me. When you actually see people that are really hurting in this world, suddenly that little upset you had with your 9th grade friends doesn't seem so insurmountable. Jill was in a program, so was Jeremy, called PALS. As far as I know, Massachusetts doesn't have it. It met as a class 1 hour a day for an entire year. They liked it so much they were in for 2 years. You had to be nominated for PALS. You didn't have to be a high flyer academically. You had to be a kid with a good heart. And they wanted it representative of all kids at the high school. So what did PALS do? Self-awareness, peer resolution. They put on events at the retirement home. They tutored elementary kids. Jill signed up to be a big sister after school. Now it was prom time. Jill says, Dad, I found a dress I'd really like to wear to prom. This was her senior prom. I don't want my first question to be, Jill, how much is this dress going to cost? I'm asked, tell me about the dress. Tell me about the style. What do you like about it so much? Then my second question, Dad, it's a little over $850. Jill, what happened to the dress she wore last year? Randy? Leaf, you're with me? Joe, are you with me on this? Does anybody remember what dress she wore an entire year ago? The women here are not so certain. This seems to be a really important thing. And by the way, was the most important question, can I afford it? Or was the most important question, does that make sense in this world where a lot of people are going without? And I could give you examples of families and kids spending thousands of dollars. At the private university school on our campus, they had to make a rule. Nobody arrives for prom by helicopter, because the parents would all want to outdo each other with showing off the amount of wealth they personally had. So Jill got the idea that I wasn't too wild about $850 for the dress. The next day she says, Dad, you can keep your money. I already tried on Sarah's dress. Sarah's my size. She goes to a different high school. Her prom's on a different night. Hey, maybe we can make a donation to a charity, but it doesn't have to be $850. Somehow she got the idea that really what being an American means is we share and we try to take care of each other. Although I am not sure that that is the climate at this moment, but it's what we absolutely have to get back to, caring about every single American. And I'm really proud to tell you that as soon as Jill finished law school, what was the first thing she did? She's a big sister to a 12-year-old girl in Houston named Anna. It's giving back. It's realizing when we're fortunate, we should be helping other people. I am not hard to get a hold of. There is my email. I promise you I answer every single email I receive. There is the 5th book. And I'd like to turn it over to my good friend, Stephen Wallace. We met 16 years ago. I was the president of a national association. I was very familiar with his work with SAD, and I brought him to talk to all the school psychologists about prevention. I'm very proud to be involved with the Center for Adolescent Research and Education. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
How's that? Is it on? All right. Thank you for being here. As Scott said, we really appreciate your coming out. It's great for me to be on Nantucket, other than the one time I come every summer in mid-July with 150 teenagers and 35 of their college-age counselors, and I sit on a bench. It's the same bench every year. I took a picture of it tonight in front of Med on Main, and that's as far as I get. I go from Highline to the bench, from the bench to Highline, and then I go back to Cape Cod. So this trip actually afforded me an opportunity to go out into the community a little bit and to meet a bunch of very fine people, and I appreciate that. So Scott mentioned my book, The Reality Gap, and I want to start talking a little bit about some of the bad things related to the reality gap. What is the reality gap? It is what I call the disconnect between the real world that kids live in and the make-believe world that many of their parents want them to live in, or maybe think that they live in. And I'm going to point to some of the statistics. But I want to start out by telling you a story. I was giving a speech at an independent school in Connecticut called Loomis Chaffee. And there was about 500 students, one of whom happened to be one of my campers at Cape Cod Sea Camps in Brewster, Massachusetts. And he had been asked by the head of school to introduce me. And that was an assignment he was particularly excited about. And so he was up on stage and behind the podium, and he gave this really rousing introduction of me. And I was sitting in the front row, and I jumped up and I ran up the steps, and I tripped on the top step. And I sort of went sprawling across the, sort of cartwheeling across the stage, much to the delight of the student body, which thought it was hilarious. And at the end of my speech that day, this kid came up to talk to me, not my camper, another kid, and he said, "Hey, that was awesome." And I said, "Oh, great, I'm glad you liked what I had to say." And he said, "No, not that." He said, "The way you pretended to fall at the beginning just to, you know, loosen up the crowd and make us feel more comfortable." And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to go with that. So I said, "Oh yeah, I do that everywhere." And the analog here is that things aren't always what they seem, and that's what I found in my research about the reality gap. So here are some of the statistics attached to the reality gap. Compared to what their parents say about them, my data show that kids are 8 times more likely to say they're using alcohol. They're 4 times more likely to say that they're using other drugs, and they're twice as likely to say they're having sex. Again, as opposed to what their parents say about them. That's the disconnect that I'm referring to. There's also a disconnect that shows up in the data about what teens say they're most concerned about and what their parents say their teens are most concerned about. So here are just a few of the points. So 83% of young people in my research say they're very concerned about the issue of impaired driving. Why? Because either they're driving impaired, their friends are driving impaired, or they're riding with friends who are impaired. That's why. And yet when we asked their parents, now these are not kids and parents, these are kids and their parents. We sampled both. 48% said that that was an issue of concern to their child. Again, another disconnect. When it comes to the issue of youth suicide, which Scott spoke to, 17% of kids said that that was a very important issue to them, very concerning to them. And yet only 5% of their parents thought that it was an important issue to them. Okay? Again, reality gap on display. Let me tell you some stories from some focus groups that we've done in different cities around the country. Everybody know what a focus group is? Get a bunch of kids in a room around a conference table, and there's a one of those police mirrors. Sorry, Kevin. So we're the people that are paying for the research can watch through the one-way mirror and see what the kids are saying. So I was in Los Angeles, and there was a group of high school students sitting around this table. And by the way, we had their parents, again, in another focus group in a room next to that. And so I could run back and forth, and I had a little list that told me which parent belonged to which child. So I could hear the 2 different versions of reality. So the group with the teens, there was one kid in particular who was really dominating the room. He was sort of this tall, lanky, blonde-haired surfer dude kind of kid, very Southern California. And he was sort of regaling his focus group mates with stories about smoking marijuana before going to school, how much alcohol they drank on weekends, how he would be the designated driver because, as he said, I drive wasted better than any of my friends. And then a few minutes later, I went into the parent group, and I listened to his mother ask the moderator why she was even involved in this focus group, because her son was not participating in any of the behaviors that were being talked about. Now, I wanted to sort of bang on the glass and say, wake up and smell the coffee. But privacy considerations didn't allow me to do that. About 2 weeks later, I was down in Houston, and it was the same thing, young people and parents. In this case, it was middle school students. And the topic of sexual behavior came up. And this one mom said that she knew that her son was not sexually active because he did not plan to become sexually active until he was married. Well, lo and behold, a few minutes later, I listened to her 8th grade son talk about the fact that he had had sex with his girlfriend the year before in 7th grade in a relationship that lasted, I believe he said, about 10 days. Overall, when we look at trust versus truth, so I started doing this question. I teach a counseling class to rising 9th graders during the summer. And I would listen to them talk about their parents and their relationship with their parents. And there was always a lot of complaints. And the number one complaint is, why don't they trust us? Why do they always have to ask us what we're doing, where we're going, who we're with? Why can't they just trust us? And they're very irritated and very animated about it. And so probably about 15 years ago, I started following that discussion, asking them a question. And I would say, all right, how many of you would say that it's very important that your parents trust you about where you're going, who you're with, and what you're doing? And every kid would go, oh, it's so important. And I'd say, okay, now, how many of you lie about where you're going, who you're with, and what you're doing? And about 2/3 of the hands came up in the air. And they didn't see the disconnect. They said things like, well, we're supposed to lie, we're kids, or it's a game. So I wanted to test that in a statistical way. So I stuck those questions into a survey that we administered to about 3,000 kids nationwide. And those are the numbers. 89% of them said, almost all, 89% said it was very important that their parents trust them about those things. And yet only 40% said they were completely honest with their parents about those things. So again, reality gap on display. So here's a little reality check. Communication is key. Scott spoke about this, and I was talking with someone earlier about this. All of the research that I've been doing for over 15 years points to one critical motivator for making good choices, okay? And that is good communication with a parent, a peer, or one of those three other important adults other than a parent in a young person's life. When you add that component to any metric, it bends the curve, okay? There's this great book by Anthony Wolfe called Get Out of My Life, but First Could You Drive Me and Cheryl, it actually is, to the mall. And I wanted to share a passage from that, which is pretty humorous. And this just goes to talk about the difficulty of parent-child communication, which is what Anthony's book is all about. He says, Alexander, please try to remember not to track mud through the kitchen. You're always yelling at me about something. I don't always yell at you. I just don't want mud tracked into the kitchen. You're a neat freak. You don't know what it's like living in this house. Would you get off my case, please? Alexander, don't talk to me that way. What way? Listen to your words. Listen to your tone of voice. It is so disrespectful. A teenager shouldn't talk to his parents that way. I'm not talking to you in any way. You're the one who's disrespecting me. I'm not disrespecting you. Yeah, you are. You're always nagging at me about something, like now, for instance. Okay. Sound familiar to anybody? Okay, so good communication is not always easy, but it's important. And expressing love and support, like Scott talked about, but also expressing expectations is critical to the choices that young people make. Okay, so I had this interesting conversation with one of my campers named Ben. And at the time, Ben was 16 years old. And I said, so Ben, when you're not at school and you're not playing sports, which he did a lot of, this conversation actually took place on the sideline of one of his lacrosse games. I said, what do you do? And he said, well, you know, I hang out with my friends. And I said, like on weekends? And he said, yeah. And I go, what else do you do? He said, I go to parties. I said, are kids drinking at those parties? He said, yeah. I said, are you drinking at those parties? And he said, yeah, of course. And I said, well, what do your parents think about that? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, do they ask you? And he said, no. I said, what do you think that they would say? And he said, well, I would assume they wouldn't want me drinking at parties, but they don't know that I do. And I said, well, suppose you said that to them, or they said that to you. And he said, well, if they said we don't want you drinking at parties, I wouldn't drink at parties. And I thought, well, there you go. It's that simple. Are you drinking? Yes. Don't? Okay, I won't. It's not always that easy. In our research, we identified what we call decision types among young people. And I used to be a political consultant, so I like to use political analogs. So when there's an election, right, and you're a candidate or a campaign manager, as I was, there's three buckets of voters, okay? There's the people that are with you, and you know that they're going to be with you. And you don't spend a lot, it's like your base, right? And you don't spend a lot of time or money on those people because they're going to come out and vote for you. And then there's the people on the other end of the spectrum who are never going to vote for you. No matter what you do, what you say, or how much time and money you spend on that demographic, they're not going to vote for you. So where do you spend your money? Anyone? And your time. I'm sorry? Right. The ones are not sure. They're sort of on the fence. That's where you're going to spend your time as a candidate. Well, it turns out that when you sort young people by decision type, you find the same three type of categories, okay? You have the avoiders. These are the kids that are not engaging in destructive behaviors. Those are the kids that you want, right? And those are the kids that actually you drive crazy when you're constantly telling them to make good choices because they say to you in some way or another, you don't get it. I don't do that stuff. That's not me. Okay? Occasional reminders, that's okay. But they don't need to hear it every time they go out the door. What they do need is encouragement and reinforcement for making good choices. That's what they need. On the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call experimenters. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're experimenting with dangerous behaviors, but it means they're prone to experimentation. Okay? Excuse me, that's the middle group. The other spectrum are the repeaters. These are the repeaters are the kids that are regularly making destructive decisions, and I'm sure my colleague Scott would agree with me. Those are the people that probably need professional help. These are kids that are abusing alcohol, abusing other drugs, engaged in all kinds of destructive behaviors, and they probably need some intervention. The middle group, sorry, I messed the order up, it's wrong on the slides, are the experimenters. Those are the ones that are prone to experimenting with potentially destructive behaviors. Those are the kids that need the reminders. Those are the kids that benefit the most from those conversations and expectations. It's amazing to me when I have conversations with young people about issues like underage drinking or other drug use or early intimate sexual behavior or bullying or violence or whatever the case may be. And I'll ask them, well, what do your parents want you to do? What are their expectations for you? And so many of those kids say, I have no idea, never talked with them about it. So that type of communication, expressing those expectations, critically important in driving the types of behaviors that I'm guessing you want to see from your young people. Key influencers are also really important. Okay, so who do you think what do you think is the #1 reasons why kids make good choices? Anyone want to take a guess? Parents. Okay, parents are the #1 reason why kids make good choices. Okay, the #1 reason why kids make poor choices. Who do you think they are? Peers. Second reason why kids make good choices. Who do you think they are? Peers. Right. So that's the tipping point. Okay? It's all about the peer group. It's all about who they're hanging out with. Parents #1 for good choices, peers #1 for bad choices, peers #2 for good choices. So that's the equation you want to flip. Is who are they hanging out with? What type of decisions are they making? This goes to Scott's point about not only knowing your kids' friends, but knowing your kids' parents, knowing what their values are, knowing who's going to talk the same party line as you're talking. We were talking earlier about that with the superintendent, about the importance of parents banding together with messaging for kids so that we're all talking from the same script. So here's the reality gap on the good side of the ledger. Okay? My friend Rich Lerner, who runs a research center very similar to mine at Tufts University, found in his research what he calls 5 C's. And this is among young people today. Okay? Competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. Those are qualities that he found overwhelmingly present in the lives of young people today. And that's very encouraging news. And what Rich says is that those C's may coalesce in a 6th one, which is contribution, which Scott talked about in terms of service. I call it civic engagement. We have a Generation Z, that is incredibly interested and focused on changing the world for the better. That's a really good thing. Okay? So I always add a 7th C, which I mentioned when I was speaking to the teachers this afternoon, which is courage. Because I think courage is a highly underrated asset that we don't encourage enough in young people. We don't encourage them to be courageous, okay, to do those other things, to be competent, to have confidence, to connect with other people, to demonstrate character, to be a caring individual. Those things all take some degree of courage. And there's also a relationship between those attributes and courage and the concept of resilience, which Scott touched on. And if we have time during the Q&A, which we want to leave plenty of time for, I'll share with you a couple of youth voices on the topic of resilience. Here's some more good news. My research shows that the majority of teens say they feel happy almost every day and perceive themselves as friendly, honest, and smart. They say that their relationships with their parents make them feel good about themselves, that their parents respect them, and that they feel close to their parents. And here's a data point from Opinion Research International. Hold on to your seats. Okay? A significant number of teens say that they actually want to spend more time with their parents. I know, it's shocking. But that's a really good thing too. Okay. A lot of the parent programs that I do around the country are called Parent Power, right? Because that's what we're talking about tonight, the power that you have in the lives of your children to be very positive forces. So I wanted to share with you a story that I was told as a child at summer camp. It's a story about a very wealthy man and the caretaker of his estate. Prior to departing for a 5-month-long European vacation, the wealthy man summoned his longtime loyal caretaker and asked him, while he was gone, to build a second home on his vast property. This one was to be more informal, by way of a lodge down on the lake. The wealthy man said, "Spare no expense. Use only the finest oak from Canada, blown glass and tiles from Italy, and cover the floors in the best Persian rugs available." Sensing an opportunity to finally have some money of his own, the caretaker proceeded to build the wealthy man's lodge. But instead of using the finest materials, he uses the cheapest, though made to look expensive. The difference he pocketed for himself. Upon the wealthy man's return from Europe, his caretaker proudly handed him back the keys to his new lodge on the lake. But the wealthy man hands them back to the caretaker, saying, quote, "The lodge you built is not for me, but rather for you, in thanks for your many years of loyal service." My analog is that I believe that many young people today are building their futures the way that that caretaker built what ultimately became his house. Bad inputs equal bad outputs. So the decisions that young people are making when they're in middle school, high school, college are all incredibly foundational for the people that they will become in their lives. And so we have to encourage them to think about what those inputs are, what those choices are. So how can you help? Here I want to pivot a little bit and talk about my 4 pillars of success. These are all research-driven constructs. So I'm going to explain very briefly about each one, and then more importantly, talk with you about what you can do with these constructs to help your children build a better future for themselves. The first one is sense of self, not a unique name, but a unique construct. Sense of self in my research measures the 3 most important developmental tasks of adolescence, which are identity formation, independence from their parents, and peer relationships, where they begin building more adult-like and long-lasting peer relationships that look very different than the relationships of younger childhood. So sense of self. The second is rites of passage. Okay, rites of passage refers to milestones, important events in a young person's life that mark their growth and development. The third is positive risk-taking. We talk a lot about negative risk-taking. We don't talk enough about positive risk-taking. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And the fourth is mentoring. And I've done a lot of original research on informal mentoring, and I want to share some of that with you tonight. So, sense of self. What can we do to help kids become more aware of their personal identity? What can we do to help them become more independent from us? And what can we do to help them establish healthy peer relationships? There are some things right there. Those are all things that you can do to help your child establish a positive sense of self. So rites of passage. You know, it used to be in yesteryear, there were very significant rites of passage for boys and girls. They were usually different, whether it was farming with their dads for the boys or learning to be, you know, a homemaker or with their moms for girls. There were things that signified steps towards maturity. In today's society, we don't have many of those things. There are organizations that do. Summer camps, for example, are really good at rites of passage. Scouting, Boys and Girl Scouts are really good at rites of passage. Okay? Bar mitzvahs, very important demonstrations of rites of passage. But too often we sort of zoom right through our children's adolescence without taking time to recognize what's truly important to them and meaningful to them. I remember the story of one young high school girl telling me that she was so proud when she got her first job and she got her first paycheck. And to her, it was a sign that, like, wow, I'm almost an adult. And she said she came home and she showed it to her parents, and they grabbed it out of her hand and they said, "This is going right in your college fund." Boom. And they sort of missed the point that she wasn't excited about the money. She was excited about having the responsibility of a job and being paid for it, being recognized for it. Okay. Talk about your own personal milestones when appropriate. And watch, obviously, as Scott talked out, for cues from your kids. Signs of happiness, joy, stress, anxiety, depression, especially around impending change. Okay, positive risk-taking. You know, there's this long-held tenet in psychology and youth development that kids, maybe especially boys, are hardwired to take negative risks. And that if only we could replace those negative risks with positive risks, we'd be way ahead of the game. And I always thought that was a really cool concept. But I couldn't find any data that backed it up. So I did some research on it for a whole year. And I found that indeed it's true. When young people take positive risks in their lives, they're much less likely to take negative risks in their lives. So what can you do to encourage positive risk-taking? Okay, again, pay attention to what seems important to them. Ask how they feel about transitions at school and home. Talk about, again, your own personal milestones. What made a difference for you? Okay, and finally, mentoring. Mentoring, to me, is probably the most important thing that I talk about. I like to say that there's a lot of things that each of us in this room cannot do. But there's one thing that each of us in this room can do, and that's to be a mentor. My research on informal mentors. Informal mentors are the mentors that young people experience in their everyday lives. Okay, that's different than matched mentoring or formal mentoring, like a big sister or big brother. Those are really important, and those relationships have been studied for years and show tremendously positive outcomes. But I wanted to see if the relationships that young people have with important peers in their lives, with their parents, with their teachers, with their coaches, with their camp counselors, also make a difference. With their physicians, with their mental health professionals, with their faith-based mentors. We've looked at all of that in our research. And not only do we replicate the positive outcomes of matched mentors, but we exceed them, okay, in terms of how young people feel about themselves, how much success they have academically, how much success they have socially. All of those things relate very directly to the number of mentors that they have in their lives. And again, you've heard from Scott a little bit about that as well. Scott also talked about showing up. You know, just showing up for a athletic event, showing up for a drama event, showing up for a recital. That's been a thing of mine since I've been working with young people, especially when I lived in New England year-round. I literally spent every weekend when I wasn't at summer camp driving around New England going to graduations and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and soccer games and whatever. Sometimes 3 or 4 on Saturday and 3 or 4 more on a Sunday, because I always thought it was so important just to show up. It's not necessarily about what you say, it's about that you are there. A number of years ago, quick story, it was about 3 days before staff orientation was going to start at camp. And if any of you have ever worked at camp, it is the definition of controlled chaos. And 3 days before my staff of over 100 college students arrives is like the busiest time in my universe. I'm working like 20 hours a day. And I get an email from the mom of one of my campers. His name was John. And his mom emailed me and said, hey, John's going to be working towards his Eagle Scout award this summer. And we were wondering, do you have any certified merit badge counselors that could sign off on his awards? And I thought, well, that's a good question. I have no idea. So I said, let me ask a colleague. So I asked around, and I emailed her back, and I said, I'm sorry, apparently we don't have any certified merit badge counselors. And she said, that's okay. You can be one. All you have to do is take a course, pass an exam, and you can sign off on John's awards. And I wrote her back and said, you know, Pat, I'd love to help you out, but my staff's coming in like less than 3 days, and I'm like in complete panic mode. And then she wrote me back, and all it said was, I know you'll do it for John. She knows me too well, so I took the course, passed the exam, and I'm now a certified merit badge counselor in swimming and archery. So if any of you have kids that need help, I'm your guy. So the reason I tell that story is because as a thank you, she sent me a book called This I Believe, which is based on the PBS series, radio series. Anybody heard of This I Believe? It's a series of essays from people, some of them famous, some of them not, about one thing they feel really passionate about, one thing they really believe in. And in that book, I found an essay that was so reinforcing to how I had conducted myself in my role as a camp director. And I wanted to share it with you because I think it relates directly to the construct of mentoring. It's called This I Believe, The Power of Presence, and was written by another psychologist, Debbie Hall. She wrote, "Presence is a noun, not a verb. It is a state of being, not doing. States of being are not highly valued in a culture which places a high priority on doing. Yet true presence, or being with another person, carries with it a silent power to bear witness to a passage, to help carry an emotional burden, or to begin a healing process. In it, there is an intimate connection with another that is perhaps too seldom felt in a society that strives for ever faster connectivity. With therapy clients," she said, "I am still pulled by the need to do more than be, yet repeatedly struck by the healing power of connection created by being fully there in the quiet understanding of another. In it, none of us are truly alone. The power of presence is not a one-way street, not something we give to others. It always changes me, and always for the better. This I believe, the power of presence." Okay, so I'm also easy to reach, and I also respond to every email. I've had a lot of email problems lately, but if you don't get an email back from me, it's because I didn't get one from you. I believe my cards were passed out at the beginning. I have some more if you didn't get one. My website is stephengraywallace.com, and there's a contact place on there. That's the book that I was talking about. I'm working on another book right now called Stretching Toward Adulthood, which is about those pillars of success and all the positive things about young people in the world today. So I thank you for your attention. We're going to do some Q&A, and if I forget, remind me to tell you the story about Ryan. Thank you very much. Anybody want to start? Oh, this is good. We talked to the teachers this afternoon, and it was like,
in fairness, I was one of those teachers, so it took
there
me
you go.
time to get ready.
Okay, fair enough.
So my question was just when you, thank you. When you were speaking before about noticing the, yeah, okay. So when you were speaking before about the noticing which people, students, children need the most, or where your resources are best invested, all I was struck with was that idea of, at the same time that they're asking to be trusted, they're frequently not telling us the truth. So how do you identify which children are going to be your experimenters and are genuinely not already deciding one path for themselves versus the children that aren't?
It's a great question. How do you know if your kid's a repeater, an experimenter, or an avoider? And there is a degree of trust that's necessary, right? So I think going back to that trust versus truth paradigm is really important because we want to be able to trust our kids and they want to be able to trust us. And so I always say to young people when I'm talking to them that trust is a fundamental building block of all relationships, and continue to stress the importance of that trust. How do you tell? You tell by doing things like Scott said, by having dinner with them, by playing basketball with them, by going to the lacrosse games, like Ben standing on the sideline and saying, yeah, I go to parties and I drink on the weekends. But if my parents told me no, I would stop. Okay, let's go talk to your parents. So I know that sounds a little Pollyanna-ish, but my experience is that when you are truly present in your kids' lives and you're making that time and taking that effort, that they will be honest with you and they will answer your questions. Again, the number of kids who say, my parents never asked me, it just bowls me over. And people say to me, well, how did you know that, that Ben was drinking? Or how did you know that Susie was having sex? I say, because I asked them. and they tell me. So I think that's the answer that I would give.
Fine. Good.
Other questions? Yes? Okay, examples of positive risk-taking behavior. That's a great question. And we really struggled with this in our research because what we found was that there's no one-size-fits-all. What's a positive risk for one person might not be a positive risk for another. So I like to boil it down to something as simple as saying, so for the star football player to try out for the school play, or for the violinist to try out for the soccer team, or something that's out of their comfort zone. Community service is another positive risk we identified. Putting yourself out there to work with the disabled, or to raise money for cancer research, or to do something like that. Anything that's really out of their comfort zone that leads to a successful conclusion is sort of how we categorize positive risk-taking.
I have something I'd like to add to that. I'm a very big fan of adventure-based counseling. Do you all know what that is? High elements, you choose to go up and do a high element. You're on safety belay. We have an entire team of people, but again, you chose to do that. And I would say part of the problem that's wrong in the world is we don't have adults at the other end of a kid's belay rope, and I mean literally and figuratively. So I convinced the school superintendent to give me an opportunity to talk to the school board about I wanted the high elements to work on trust and self-esteem, low elements to work on teamwork, problem-solving, communication. And you know how I introduced that topic to the school board? I'd like to tell you how I spent my day today. I followed the schedule of a 13-year-old who died by suicide. I met her closest friends. I met her brothers and sisters. I went to her parents' home. And I couldn't help but think all day long if we had more programs that helped connect kids and help them be able to solve problems and feel like they belong to something. I got a 7-0 vote in favor of I could have my adventure-based counseling program. Superintendent took me aside and said, great job on your presentation. You know they didn't give any money. They didn't give any money? No. They just said you could have the program. With the help of other people, I raised $750,000 and built 3 ropes courses, 3 support buildings. I ran it for 14 years. Kids could go out there and take a risk by climbing, by jumping, but we're at the other end of the belay rope. They're not taking the risk with guns, cars, drugs, motorcycles. They're taking the risk in a very safe position. My favorite thing, we would do an activity, then we'd sit on tree stumps and we'd talk about it. What can you carry with you? Did you feel like you got encouragement from the other kids that are out here with you today? What could you take with you? This is the community that could certainly be able to afford a venture-based counseling, which to go along with the things Stephen already mentioned, which are putting yourself in a different situation, I would highly recommend looking at what's called Project Adventure, reality-oriented physical experiences. You know what I really miss about my previous job? I'm not out there doing that with students because I saw so many incredible breakthroughs. I could give you examples of a kid who didn't talk to his teacher all year long, and I put him together with something 2 people had to do together, and all of a sudden she started talking. So just be open to there is a wealth of opportunities for these new experiences.
So I'd like to also answer your question by sharing a youth voice, which I promised to do. This was something that was written by one of my campers named Michael. His name was Michael Goodgame. When he was a junior at Carleton College in Minnesota, he was on his way to the airport with 4 of his teammates to fly to California to compete for the national championship in ultimate frisbee, which was his passion in life, other than sailing and summer camp. And unfortunately, they hit some ice, and the SUV they were driving in spun around into the opposite lane, and they were hit head-on by a tractor-trailer. And Michael and 3 of his teammates were killed. Michael's parents asked me to come up to Westport, Connecticut to deliver a eulogy at his funeral, and I shared this passage that Michael had written, and I think it speaks to positive risk-taking and resiliency all at the same time. Michael said, quote, "Every few months I become a new person. not all at once and not in a born-again sort of way. It's a gradual transformation. Over time, my thoughts, feelings, and attitudes about the world and how I fit into it seem to shift. When I ask myself when it is that I learn and grow as a human being, I find myself thinking not of times when I carefully measured results of possible outcomes, but of times when I took a risk or did something out of character. The most satisfying moments come when I turn off my brain's executive function and let my mind do what it knows is right. These are the times that I learn, because these are the times that I step outside my comfort zone and really think. Training myself out of being someone who feels as though he has to have his life planned out has been and is difficult. But building the confidence to attack what I do, not knowing what may come of it, that's what will get me where I want to go. This makes for a sort of path. I may slow down or stumble on that path, but I won't turn back. Other questions? Yes? Right. Well, I think it's complicated. And like many things in life, there's a lot of good things about technology and there's a lot of challenging things about technology. I think having technology-free zones is important. We have that at summer camp, even for our 14 to 17-year-olds. Their phones are collected, they're locked up, they're given on certain occasions when we're off, for safety reasons, when we're off campus on trips, which we take a lot of. But otherwise, they don't have the use of their phones. And it was interesting, last summer, 2016, a national reporter for NPR came down and taped a counseling session with me and about 16-year-olds on the topic of not having their phones at summer camp. And it aired on All Things Considered the next night. And I got calls from alums all over the country who heard it during drive time. But it was so interesting what the kids said. They all agreed that when they got to camp and they had to turn in their phones, that it was excruciating, that they hated it. And at the very first time they got a chance to use their phone, they were just glommed on it, like looking to catch up and what did we miss out on and what are our friends doing and, all that kind of stuff. What are they posting? And then they said, they also said, one kid I remember saying that he had phantom vibrations in his pocket, like he thought his phone was buzzing, and then he realized he didn't have his phone. It was locked up in the office. But they said by the end of the second week that they didn't even care anymore. When they got their phones, they didn't even use them. They just put them in their pocket. They didn't even want to know what their friends were doing. They were so engaged in the community they were in and on being with each other that it was no longer that important. So I thought that was really telling. But I do think, breaks are good. And my experience is the kids say they enjoy that time without their phones, believe it or not.
So your question is about guidelines and parameters for kids. And obviously this is a developmental issue. Earlier I was saying I think the problem is they've been given too much way too soon. There is some research out there saying, good news, kids are having less sex, they're drinking less, but they may be more depressed than ever before because they're home and isolated. Sometimes because they're on their devices. Sometimes I'll show a little cartoon. It shows kids playing outside today. They're all on the front porch with their technology. Think of all the times it's a beautiful day, it's a playground, it's a basketball court, it's some kind of playing field, and there's not a single kid out there. They used to have all of these impromptu games. Everybody gathers. We got to work it out. We're going to play a game. We're all going to enjoy it. I'm not sure we see much of that anymore. But I think as a parent, you have good ideas about what to do, and the more parents unite. And in some ways, you could probably sum up my presentation tonight with just a couple of sentences. One is love and truly appreciate your child and never hesitate to tell them how much you love them. But at the same time, there are 4 cabinets in your home you need to take charge of. The medicine cabinet, the liquor cabinet, the gun cabinet, and the internet and technology.
Can I bring you a mic? Excuse me.
Just yesterday we got an app to control the Wi-Fi of all. It's $89 for a year it was to go premium, and we can control 10 devices with that. So my daughter's going to get an hour. It's just so hard to control if I can't just go zoop. And there's going to be some turmoil, I think, for a while. And it was too much too soon. My husband was right on that one. They got those phones too soon, or she did. He doesn't have one yet, but it feels so good, and it's just going to take a while before she knows. It's just the trying to manage and figure, but that's just, I have so much relief there, and it's simple. Like, I apologize, I did it too soon. This is what you get. You get an hour from here to here. I just feel a lot of relief, so I wanted to share it.
Thank you.
Good job.
Well, it's been our distinct pleasure to be here. And by the way, Stephen and I have known each other a long time. This is the first joint presentation ever. So thank you all for attending, and we wish you the best with your school, and we wish all the parents the best. And frankly, I want to ask you to do one more thing tonight as you're leaving. There is somebody here you don't know. Say hello to them, because really what you want to do is unite parents, all working together and all looking out for each other's child. So thank you very much.
Thank you.